I'll never forget that night. The night everything I thought I knew about my family shattered like glass. We were sitting around the dinner table. Me, my son Daniel, and his wife, Rebecca. The room smelled of roasted chicken and rosemary, the kind of meal that should have felt warm, comforting like family. Instead, the air was thick with something else, something colder. Daniel, my only son, was smiling too much. Not the kind of smile that comes from joy, but the smug kind, like he wasn't on a joke I didn't understand. Rebecca, his wife, sat across from me with her usual smirk, sipping her wine slowly, her eyes never really meeting mine. I'd gotten used to the tension, to the little barbs and comments they threw my way. Maybe it's time you think about assisted living, Dad. Or, you shouldn't strain yourself with money stuff. We can handle it now. Always said with a smile, but I knew what they meant. They wanted control of me, of my life, of everything I had worked for. That night, I told myself I'd swallow my pride and just get through dinner. Just one more evening of pretending things were fine. And then my phone buzzed. It was sitting face down on the table next to my plate. I almost ignored it. Daniel hated when I checked my phone during meals, but something told me to flip it over. And when I did, my blood ran cold. The text came from an unknown number. The words were short, sharp, terrifying. Get up, leave now if you value your life. For a second, I thought it had to be some kind of mistake, a prank. My hands started shaking as I held the phone. My fork clattered against my plate, and Daniel looked up at me with those sharp blue eyes of his. "You okay, Dad?" he asked. Rebecca tilted her head, her smile curling at the edges like she was enjoying the moment. I wanted to ask questions. I wanted to demand answers. But the text, it didn't say ask. It said leave. So I did the one thing they never expected. I pushed back my chair and stood up. "Excuse me," I muttered, my voice trembling. Daniel frowned. "Where are you going?" "Dinner's not over." Rebecca's eyes narrowed, her hand gripping her wine glass. But I didn't answer. I walked out, step after step, down the hall, out the door, into the cool night air. My heart was pounding so loud, I could hear it in my ears. I had barely reached the end of the driveway when I heard it. Sirens. Red and blue lights flashed against the windows of the house I had once called home. Police cars screeched to a stop. Armed officers poured out, shouting commands. Within seconds, they were storming inside. And then the screaming started. Rebecca's shrill voice cutting through the night. Daniel shouting, panicked. No longer smug, no longer in control. I stood there frozen on the sidewalk, my whole body shaking. My neighbors peeked from their curtains, some stepping onto their porches to watch the chaos unfold. And in that moment, one thought kept running through my head. What on earth had my son and his wife done? So, tell me, if you got that message at a family dinner, would you have obeyed it? Or would you have stayed and demanded answers? Let me know in the comments. And if this story already has your heart racing, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Because trust me, things are only going to get darker from here. When people ask me about Daniel, I always stumble over my words. How do you explain the boy you raised with love and sacrifice, only to watch him turn into someone you hardly recognize? Daniel wasn't always this way. When he was young, he was my pride. His mother, God rest her soul, and I did everything for him. We weren't rich, but we made sure he had the best we could give. I worked double shifts at the plant, sometimes through the night, coming home with grease under my nails and an ache in my back so strong I could barely stand. His mother picked up odd jobs, sewing, tutoring kids in the neighborhood, anything to keep food on the table. We wanted Daniel to have more than we did, and for a while, it seemed worth it. He was smart, ambitious. He got into a good college, became the first in our family to wear a graduation gown. I still have that photo framed on my dresser. Me, his proud father, standing beside him in a cap and gown. But success changes people. Or maybe it just reveals who they really are. Daniel started working in finance. Big money, fast life. Suddenly, my son had a taste for expensive suits, shiny watches, cars that cost more than our whole house. I told myself he deserved it, that he was reaping the benefits of hard work. But slowly, something changed. His calls grew fewer. Visits became rare. When he did show up, he seemed distracted, impatient, like spending time with me was a chore. And then came Rebecca. Rebecca was beautiful, I'll give her that. Sharp cheekbones, perfect smile, always dressed like she was about to step onto a magazine cover. But from the first time I met her, I felt a chill. There was something in her eyes, a calculating look, like she was always assessing what she could gain from a situation. At first, she played the sweet daughter-in-law, hugging me, calling me dad, insisting I let them handle bills when I visited. But it didn't take long before the mask slipped. "Daniel, your father shouldn't be living alone at his age," she'd say when she thought I couldn't hear. Or, "It's not safe for him to manage his finances anymore. What if he forgets to pay something? We should take care of it." It sounded like concern, but I knew better. I saw the way her eyes lingered when she looked at the deed to my house. I saw how quickly she steered conversations toward money, assets, future planning. Daniel, blinded by love or maybe greed, went along with it. And little by little, they began treating me not like a father, but like a burden. It was subtle at first. A sigh when I asked for help fixing something. A joke about old folks at the dinner table. Then it grew sharper. "Dad, maybe it's time you sell the house and move into a retirement community," Daniel said one afternoon, sipping his scotch like he was making a business deal. Rebecca chimed in, her tone sugary sweet. "You'd be so much safer there. We'd visit all the time, of course." But I knew what they meant. Sell the house. Hand over the money. Get out of the way. I stayed quiet. I always stayed quiet. That was my mistake. Still, I couldn't bring myself to cut them off. After all, Daniel was my son, my only son, and somewhere, buried under the arrogance and the greed, I wanted to believe the boy I raised was still in there. But the cracks were showing. The smiles felt more like sneers. And every dinner invitation felt less like family and more like a setup. So when I sat at their table that night, chicken on my plate and wine glasses clinking, I already had a knot in my stomach. I didn't know what they were planning, but I knew it wasn't good. And when that text came, when my phone buzzed with that warning, I realized something chilling. Maybe I hadn't been paranoid after all. It's funny, isn't it? How cruelty doesn't always come in loud explosions. Sometimes it creeps in slowly, like a dripping faucet that you ignore until the whole sink overflows. With Daniel and Rebecca, it started with little things. The phone calls that went unanswered, the invitations that never came. When I did see them, Rebecca always had a way of twisting the knife with a smile. One Thanksgiving, she placed my plate in front of me and said, "I made sure to cut your turkey into small pieces, Dad. You know, so you don't choke." She said it in front of a dozen guests, laughter filling the room while my face burned red. At Christmas, Daniel gave me a gift, a glossy brochure for a senior living facility. "They've got bingo, Dad. You'd love it," he said with a smirk. Rebecca giggled and added, "And best of all, you wouldn't have to worry about paying bills anymore. We'd handle all that." I smiled through it. I told myself it was just teasing. But late at night, lying alone in my house, I couldn't shake the dread creeping up my spine. Then came the day they crossed a line I couldn't ignore. I had just come back from the grocery store. My knees were aching and I was juggling 2 heavy bags when I heard voices inside the house. At first, I thought I'd forgotten to lock the door, but then I recognized the voices. It was Daniel and Rebecca. I froze in the hallway, groceries digging into my palms, and listened. "Your father's too stubborn," Rebecca hissed. "If he won't sign over the power of attorney, we'll have to push harder." Daniel sighed. "I know, but he's not dumb. If we force it, he'll suspect something." Rebecca's voice grew sharp, venomous. "We don't need him to suspect. We just need him to slip up, miss a payment, forget a bill. Anything we can use to prove he's incompetent. Then the court will hand us everything." My stomach dropped. My own son, my flesh and blood, plotting to strip me of my independence, my dignity, my life. I wanted to storm in, shout, demand answers. But instead, I stayed quiet. I backed out of the house, set the groceries down on the porch, and left without a word. That night, I didn't sleep. My mind replayed their conversation on a loop. It wasn't just greed anymore. It was betrayal, a knife between the ribs from the people I loved most. After that day, every interaction felt like a performance. Daniel's hugs felt staged. Rebecca's smiles were daggers hidden behind lipstick. I played the role of the clueless old man, nodding and smiling, but inside I was on high alert. And that's why, when the dinner invitation came a week later, I hesitated. "Come by," Daniel had said. "Rebecca's making your favorite, roast chicken." I almost refused. I almost told him I was busy, that I wasn't feeling well. But something in his voice, it was too smooth, too rehearsed. My gut screamed that something was off. Still, I went, out of habit, out of love, out of a foolish hope that maybe I was wrong. But as I sat at their table that night, watching Rebecca smile too wide and Daniel laugh too loud, I felt it deep in my bones. This wasn't just dinner. This was something else. And when my phone buzzed, when that anonymous message lit up my screen telling me to leave now if I value my life, I realized something terrifying. Maybe someone out there knew the danger I was in better than I did. The night of the dinner is etched into my memory like a scar. I can still smell the rosemary chicken, hear the clink of silverware, feel the way the air seemed to press down on me with every passing second. Daniel greeted me at the door with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Rebecca kissed my cheek, her perfume sharp and overwhelming. "We're so glad you came, Dad," she said, her hand lingering on my arm a second too long. It didn't feel like affection. It felt like possession. I stepped inside, and right away I noticed a table. 3 plates, 3 wine glasses, candles burning low. It was too perfect, too staged. I'd been to enough dinners to know when something was off. We sat down, and the small talk began. Daniel asked about my week, but his eyes darted to Rebecca whenever I answered, like they were silently judging every word. Rebecca filled my glass with red wine, insisting, "Drink up, Dad. Tonight's special." Something about the way she said it sent a shiver crawling down my spine. I forced a smile, cutting into the chicken on my plate, but my stomach was tight. I pushed the food around, barely eating. That's when Daniel leaned back in his chair and said casually, "You know, Dad, we've been looking at some options for your future. A really nice community upstate. Pools, fitness centers, you'd be so happy there." Rebecca chimed in, her voice sweet as honey but her eyes sharp as knives. "Yes, and we'd handle everything. Bills, taxes, the house. You wouldn't have to worry about a thing." I set my fork down. "I'm fine where I am," I said quietly. Daniel's smile froze. "Dad, you're not listening. You can't live alone forever." Rebecca tilted her head. "We only want what's best for you." But I knew better. I knew what they wanted. And for the first time, I felt real fear, not just losing my home, but what they might be capable of if I stood in their way. That's when it happened. My phone buzzed. I glanced down. A new message from an unknown number. And as my eyes read the words, my heart nearly stopped. "Get up. Leave now if you value your life." The letters seemed to burn on the screen, searing into my mind. My hands began to tremble. The fork slipped from my fingers, clattering against the plate. Daniel's eyes narrowed. "Everything okay, Dad?" Rebecca leaned forward, her smile too wide, too forced. "Who's texting you at dinner?" I couldn't speak. My mouth had gone dry. The words echoed in my head. "Leave now if you value your life." I swallowed hard, forcing myself to stand. My chair scraped against the floor. "I should get some air," I muttered, my voice shaking. Daniel frowned. "Sit down. We're not finished." Rebecca's smile faltered. Her eyes flashed something darker, something dangerous. But I didn't listen. I walked, step by step, each one heavier than the last, down the hallway, past the photos on the wall. Family portraits of son I once knew, smiling with a joy that felt like a lie now. My heart pounded louder with every step. I reached the door. My hand hovered on the knob for a split second, doubt clawing at me. Was I being paranoid? Was it just a cruel prank? Then I remembered the look in Rebecca's eyes, the way Daniel's voice had hardened when he told me I couldn't live alone forever. No, this was real. I opened the door and stepped into the night. The air was cold against my skin, shocking me back to reality. And then I heard them, sirens, loud, fast, coming closer. Within moments, flashing red and blue lights painted the street. Police cars screeched to a stop in front of the house. Officers leapt out, guns drawn, shouting commands. I turned just in time to see them storm the front door. Shouts erupted from inside. Rebecca's scream pierced the air, shrill and terrified. Daniel's voice followed, panicked, desperate. I stood frozen at the end of the driveway, my whole body trembling. My neighbors spilled onto their porches, whispering, pointing. And there I was, an old man in the dark, watching the home of his only son get torn apart by flashing lights and shouting officers. One thought repeated in my mind, over and over. If I hadn't left, would I be the one screaming right now? The night sky pulsed red and blue, the flashing lights washing over the quiet suburban street, like some twisted carnival. I stood rooted at the edge of the driveway, my heart hammering so loud I could barely hear the officers barking commands. Hands where we can see them. Down on the ground, now. Rebecca's scream cut through the night, shrill and frantic. What's happening? You can't do this. We didn't do anything. Daniel's voice followed. But this time it wasn't the smooth, confident tone I was used to. No, this was raw panic. Wait, there's been a mistake. I took a step back, my knees shaking. For years, I had seen my son as untouchable, too smart, too polished, too careful to ever face consequences. But now he was on the ground, face pressed into the hardwood floor of his own home, hands cupped behind his back while officers shouted over him. Neighbors poured out onto their porches, their whispers like a swarm of bees. Is that Daniel? What's going on? Wasn't his father just there for dinner? I felt their eyes on me. Pity, curiosity, suspicion. Some of them waved me over, but I couldn't move. My legs felt like they were carved from stone. The front door slammed open, and two officers marched Rebecca out first. Her hair was a mess, her eyes wild, mascara streaking down her face. She thrashed against their grip, shrieking, "This is a mistake. We're good people. Let me go." Good people. I almost laughed. Behind her came Daniel, my son, my only son. His tailored shirt was wrinkled, his expensive watch dangling awkwardly as the cuffs dug into his wrists. He looked up, and for the first time in years, I saw fear in his eyes. Not the fear of losing money or status, but the primal fear of a man whose world was collapsing. "Dad," he shouted, his voice cracking. "Dad, do something. Tell them this isn't right." The words hit me like a knife. Tell them this isn't right. But wasn't it? Hadn't I overheard them plotting to strip me of everything I owned? Hadn't I seen the way Rebecca's eyes gleamed when she talked about my house? Hadn't Daniel, my flesh and blood, sat at that very table and told me I couldn't live alone anymore, as if I were some burden to be managed, not a man who'd worked his whole life to raise him? I stayed silent. Rebecca spat toward me as they pushed her into the squad car. "This is your fault, old man. You'll regret this. You'll regret everything." Her words stung, but not the way she intended. For the first time, I realized I didn't feel fear anymore. I didn't feel shame. I felt vindicated. As Daniel was shoved into another car, he locked eyes with me. "Dad, please," he begged, his voice breaking. "Help me?" I wanted to. God. Some part of me wanted to rush forward, to fight for him, to protect the boy I once tucked into bed and promised the world to. But that boy was gone, replaced by a man who saw me as nothing more than a bank account waiting to be drained. The car door slammed shut, and just like that, my son was gone. The street slowly quieted. Neighbors retreated into their homes, though I could feel their stares lingering behind closed curtains. The flashing lights faded as the squad cars pulled away. And then there was silence. Just me, standing alone under the glow of the street lamp, the cool night air wrapping around me. I sank onto the curb, burying my face in my hands. My whole body trembled. I should have felt relief. I was safe, wasn't I? Whoever sent that message had saved me. But instead, I felt hollow. What had my son done? What could possibly bring the police crashing into his house on a quiet evening like this? One thing was certain. Life as I knew it was over. The hours after the raid passed in a blur. I sat in my small living room, the hum of the refrigerator, the only sound in the house. My phone sat on the table in front of me, that anonymous text message still glowing on the screen. Get up. Leave now, if you value your life. I must have read it 100 times. Who had sent it? How did they know? And what exactly had I just escaped? My questions were answered the next morning when a knock came at my door. 2 detectives stood on the porch, their suits wrinkled from a long night. One of them, a woman with sharp eyes and a calm voice, introduced herself. "Mr. Matthews, we need to speak with you about your son and his wife." My chest tightened. "Are they in jail?" She nodded. "They're in custody. And based on what we found last night, they'll be there for a long time." I stepped aside, letting them in. The detective sat across from me at the kitchen table. The same table where Daniel once did his homework, where his mother and I shared coffee on tired mornings. Now it felt like a courtroom. The detective opened a folder, sliding a stack of papers toward me. Bank statements, property deeds, forged signatures. "Your son and his wife have been under investigation for several months," she explained. "We received tips about fraudulent activity linked to financial accounts in your name." My blood went cold. "In my name?" "Yes, sir. They've been trying to transfer assets, forge power of attorney documents, even take out loans using your identity. And..." She hesitated, glancing at her partner before continuing. "We also found evidence suggesting they were planning to accelerate the process." I frowned. "What do you mean, accelerate?" The detective's eyes softened, but her words were like ice. "Mr. Matthews, we believe they intended to harm you, to make it look like you were unfit, maybe even dead. That would have secured everything for them." The room tilted. I gripped the edge of the table, my knuckles white. My own son, the boy I raised, plotting not just to rob me, but to erase me. I shook my head. No, you must be mistaken. Daniel wouldn't." But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't true. I'd heard their whispers. I'd seen the hunger in Rebecca's eyes. I'd ignored it because the truth was too painful to admit. The detective continued. "We were planning to raid the house this week anyway, but last night we received credible intel that they were moving faster than expected. That's why we moved in immediately." I blinked, stunned. "Intel? From who?" The detective exchanged a glance with her partner. Then she said a name I hadn't heard in years. "Your granddaughter." I froze. "Emily?" She nodded. "She contacted us weeks ago. Said she'd overheard things that made her concerned for your safety. Last night, when she saw her stepmother preparing something in the kitchen that didn't look right, she sent a message." My breath caught in my throat. "Emily. My sweet Emily. Daniel's daughter from his first marriage. She was only 19, a quiet girl who always seemed overshadowed by Rebecca's loud presence. I hadn't seen much of her lately. Rebecca made sure of that, but she had saved me." I closed my eyes, tears welling. "She's the one who texted me?" "Yes," the detective confirmed. "And you did the right thing by listening. If you'd stayed..." She trailed off, leaving the rest unsaid. I didn't need her to finish. I knew when the detectives left. I sat alone for a long time, staring at the sunlight creeping across the floor. My heart was heavy, torn between grief and gratitude. Grief for the son I had lost long before the handcuffs clicked around his wrists. Gratitude for the granddaughter who had risked everything to save me. And as the weight of it all settled in, one thought kept circling in my mind. Blood doesn't always make family. Sometimes, family is the one who warns you to run before it's too late. I had stayed silent for weeks, letting Daniel and Rebecca believe they had won. They strutted around like royalty, tossing out my clothes, filling the house with Rebecca's gaudy furniture, and laughing about how the old man would die bitter and broke. But while they were busy celebrating my exile, I was busy working on something else. Justice. I didn't yell. I didn't beg. Instead, I quietly started collecting everything I needed. The recording. Remember that night Rebecca smirked and said, "He's nothing but a burden. Once he's gone, the house is ours." Well, she said it loud enough while mocking me in the kitchen. I had already been wearing a small recorder in my pocket. Every cruel word, every icy laugh, it was all saved. The financial trail. Daniel thought I didn't know how to use a computer. What he forgot was that I had worked in accounting for 30 years. I quietly logged into shared family accounts, downloaded the transactions, and traced every shady move. Turns out, they'd already taken loans against my property, without my permission, signing documents I was meant to prove that my friends was fraud. Witnesses, my neighbor Mrs. Cooper, God bless her, had overheard plenty. She heard the arguments. She saw the day they tossed me out. She was more than ready to testify. I wasn't gathering this out of spite. No, I was building a shield. If they wanted war, I wasn't going unarmed. Weeks later, Daniel and Rebecca hosted another dinner party. This one to celebrate their new chapter. Their friends toasted them for being such generous caretakers. Rebecca played the doting daughter-in-law, placing her hand over her stomach and whispering about how she wanted to raise a child in a house that would one day be all theirs. That's when I walked in, calm, dressed neatly, and holding a folder under my arm. The whole room went silent. Rebecca's fork slipped from her hand. Daniel turned pale. "Dad," he stammered. You weren't invited." "No," I said, smiling thinly, "but I was expected." I placed the folder on the table, flipping it open slowly. First, the audio recording. The room filled with Rebecca's voice, mocking me, calling me a burden, and Daniel agreeing coldly that I was just waiting to die. The guests shifted uncomfortably. Some looked away in shame. Then, the bank statements. The proof of fraud. Signatures forged. Money siphoned. Their so-called wealth built on theft. One of Daniel's friends, a lawyer, instantly recognized the seriousness of it. His face dropped. Finally, I showed the legal notice I had already filed, petitioning the court to remove them from any claim to the property and to prosecute the fraud. Rebecca gasped. Daniel slammed his fist on the table. "You wouldn't dare," he shouted. I leaned in close. Oh, I already did. Within weeks, things unraveled for them. The police began investigating the forged documents. Their friends, who had once admired their success, stopped returning calls. The bank froze their accounts pending inquiry. Rebecca's family, who thought they were marrying into money, pulled away in embarrassment. And me? I wasn't alone. My neighbors, my church group, even distant cousins came forward, offering support once they saw the truth. For the first time in a long time, I felt not like a burden, but like a man who had taken his dignity back. When the eviction notice came, it wasn't for me, it was for them. I stood in the driveway as Daniel and Rebecca were forced to load their belongings into a truck, the same smug faces now twisted with bitterness. Rebecca hissed at me, "You'll die alone for this." I just smiled. "No, Rebecca, I'll die in peace. The two of you will live with shame." And just like that, the house was quiet again. But this time, not lonely, peaceful. I sat alone in my new place last night, staring at the quiet glow of a single lamp. For the first time in years, my house was calm. No shouting, no plotting, no laughter that was more cruel than kind. Just silence and me. And I'll be honest with you, it didn't feel like victory. Yes, Daniel and Rebecca lost. They tried to make me out to be a burden, a fool, a man past his prime. They thought I'd roll over while they sold my home, erased my dignity, and left me to rot. But instead, I gathered the evidence. I stayed patient. And in the end, I turned the system they thought they controlled back onto them. They're the ones paying now, not me. But here's the part that keeps me awake at night. He's still my son, my blood, the same boy I once taught to ride a bike, who used to run into my arms after school, who once whispered, "I love you, Dad," before bed. And now, that boy is gone. Or maybe he's still there, buried under the greed, the cold ambition, the poison Rebecca dripped into his ear. I don't know. And so I asked myself, was I wrong? Should I have forgiven him? Should I have turned the other cheek, even as he spat in my face? Or was I right to show him that betrayal has consequences, that love doesn't mean becoming someone's doormat? Because revenge, it doesn't feel good. Not really. It feels heavy. Like carrying a stone you can't put down. But maybe justice isn't supposed to feel good. Maybe it's just supposed to be fair. I'll let you decide. Am I the asshole for destroying my son to save myself? Or was it the only choice a father had left when love wasn't enough anymore?